Welcome back into the Percussive Art Society Georgia Chapter interview series. My name is Andrew Bennett, and we're getting to know some of the awesome percussionists and drummers in the state, from collegiate professors to independent performers and educators. Before we dive in, I do want to take a moment to remind you, if you're not an active PAS member, please consider signing up for that, renewing whatever you need to do just so you can be part of this community. So without further ado, I do want to go ahead and introduce our guest for today. He's artist affiliate in percussion at Emory University. He plays with the Atlanta Symphony, Atlanta Ballet, Atlanta Opera, and many, many more. We have Mr. Scott Pollard. How are you today?
Great. How are you? It's a real thrill to be here. Thank you for doing this. What a great idea.
Good. Thank you. I'm excited. As we're recording ours, we've actually just launched yesterday with this. So this is kind of exciting to now be into the meat of the series. So to kind of launch us off today, my first question is always, how did you get started? What was your journey? Was there any special teacher or event that happened that convinced you to do this professionally? Let us into your story a little bit.
My pleasure. So like a lot of people, I started out playing percussion in 6th grade in middle school band. I was very fortunate. My sister, who was 4 years older than me, played in the drum line at her high school and played percussion and piano growing up, just like I did. So that was sort of my inspiration when I was very young. I don't really come from a particularly musical family. I mean, there's an appreciation and love of music, but no professional musicians, no one that ever really studied it in college either. So the bug sort of hit me pretty young. Really, it did start with piano, to be fair. I played piano for 4 or 5 years before I did percussion. And then I would say like my first real passion that I really fell in love with percussion was playing in drumline in high school, which again is a pretty common story when you ask around. And to tell you the truth, as a younger player, my dream, I was really into it back in the day. My dream was to play center stair for the Cadets of Bergen County. Like that was my thing. Followed all the shows really closely. Got to go to DCI finals a couple of times. And you may not necessarily know that if you do look at my resume, because it's by and large slightly more classically oriented than anything else. But something I hope that we'll get to during the course of the interview today is like how much I appreciate diversity and how I love pretty much every kind of percussion that there is. So after 2 years in high school, studying privately with my drumline instructor, I got to attend the Governor's School in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which the comparable program to that here is GHP. The very first Governor's School, in fact, the first of the entire country, was that school in Winston-Salem. So that's the foundation of the program. So that was kind of cool to go to where it all started. And I will say, like, there's actually a very specific moment. I don't know how many people can say this, but I have a moment I could pinpoint within about 5 seconds when I decided to do this for a living. And it was playing in literally the very first time I had ever played in an orchestra at Governor's School. The repertoire there is very forward thinking, and it was always very progressive. The idea was to sort of push the envelope of contemporary music and kind of expose students in particular to stuff they may not normally encounter in their youth orchestras and band programs. So we were playing music by Penderecki, Lutoslawski, Christopher Rouse. I mean, you kind of name it. At least 20, 30 years ago, these were like the cutting edge names. So we're playing a piece by John Adams called Harmony Lyra, which is really a fantastic piece if you don't know it. And it's not just there's one percussion instrument there. We were each, I think it required 5 or 6 players, and we had 3 that attended the school, plus our professor, our teacher. So we're just sitting there performing this thing, and we get the live concert. Every student at the Governor's School is there, and we're playing this piece, and I'm just surrounded by all these instruments. And then we're getting towards the grand finale of the 3rd movement. And I remember the brass played this really huge chord. It was insane, Andrew. This just wave of like euphoria came over me. Like I've experienced it maybe 5 or 6 times since then as a performer, but that was the first time, and it was my drug. It instantly became my drug. And it's like, okay, how can I experience that again? What do I need to do to make that happen? And just about every step I've taken in my career since then, including my education as well, has kind of led me. That was the springboard, so to speak. So, and I'll just tell you quickly about my education. From there, I basically went back to high school for a year after Governor's School, of course, and finished my junior year, and had decided at that point that I did want to pursue music. So I transferred from my senior year to North Carolina School of the Arts. And then from there, it was on to the Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music, where I did my undergrad. And I will give a full shout out, I think, to my professor there, Jim Cully, a member of the percussion group Cincinnati, who was my teacher all 4 years and was one of my biggest inspirations. He's actually a very low-key dude, but I remember after I left there, I went to Rice University to get my master's degree. I wanted to have kind of an orchestral focus to try to pursue getting an orchestral percussion job. And I remember watching one of the first times I saw video of myself performing on someone else's recital, actually. I remember looking at myself like performing going, my God, I look just like Jim Cully. Like just the way that I moved and the way my hands moved. And I remember thinking, God, I just paid a wonderful compliment to myself. Because I remember being so inspired by the way he moved, and it was very subtle and understated, but every motion had a purpose, and the direction of his musicality was very inspiring to me. So not that I didn't have other great teachers along the way, but I definitely owe a big shout out to him. So anyway, that's up through my education. I can certainly continue through there, but we still have another like 15, 20 years to go.
Now, I'm going to interject before I get to my next actual question. When you finished that school, when you went through master's and got all that done, did you go straight into working? Did you kind of have like the year off of like, let me go backpack across Europe, or how quickly did you jump into professional playing?
That's funny that you mentioned that because, well, first of all, I actually did take a year off between Cincinnati and Rice. And part of that was I just wanted to work. Like I had a bunch of freelance work set up for myself in Cincinnati. I was principal percussion of the Kentucky Symphony at the time, just across the river. And I taught and instructed and was an arranger for the Over the Rhine Steel Drum Band, which was an inner city group that Over the Rhine is sort of at that time was a really fairly downtrodden part of Cincinnati. And they had the Peaslee Neighborhood Center had put together this community steel drum group of mostly underprivileged children. In some cases, there were some adults as well. And I just loved doing that. It was so inspiring to me. And it just sort of further reinforced the idea that I wanted to do music for a living. Also, after being in school every year since I was 5, I was tired. So like I slept late and then I practiced as much as I could. I went back to campus and practiced from like the midnight to 4 a.m. shift when there was nobody around. Had managed to hang on to my key. So at the beginning of my second year at Rice, I took I guess at that time that was my third professional orchestra audition, and very, very fortunate I won it. And it was with the Buffalo Philharmonic Orchestra. It was to play timpani and percussion in Buffalo. And the interesting thing that you mentioned, the backpacking through Europe, is I had always wanted to do that. And this actually happened. I won the gig in September of God knows whatever year that was. Maybe it was 98, probably 1998. And they said, well, we want you right away. And I said, well, 2 things. I'd really love to finish my degree first. If there's any way you could wait a year, which is a pretty big ask. But I was worried if I started, I wasn't going to finish my master's, and I knew that was going to be important at some point. And so they agreed. And then the summer came around. They said, well, we have this summer season. Can you come play the summer? I said, well, apparently it's optional according to the contract. So if you don't mind, if you could wait till September, I'd really love to do this Europe trip that I had planned for myself. So I did exactly what you said. I spent 7 weeks just by myself, did a solo backpacking trip kind of all over Europe, wherever, go to the train station and see, where do I feel like going tonight? And by the way, I saw and experienced some incredible music on that trip, as you may imagine. So yeah, that's how it all started for me.
It's really cool to hear stories like that, because I think a lot of time, and hopefully we have some younger listeners or younger watchers with this right now, we think that either we do the full journey straight through school, maybe straight to DMA, whatever it may be, and then you live your life, or you do that first 4 years, you take a year off, and then suddenly your life disappears. But it's nice to know you can take a year off, be right back into it, and then have that full career. And then, like you said, you had a gig waiting, but you still took that time to, I'm going to go enjoy something, do something wild for me. I'm going to go tour Europe on my own. So very cool stuff. And I say this on almost every interview. I like those nuggets where somebody can take away this thing of live your life. Don't forget to live your life. And you can always come back and finish the school or the career.
Yeah, I feel like in Europe, in many ways, Europe, Australia, the Kiwis, like sort of have it figured out with the idea of a gap year. I think there's a lot to be said for that. It's funny, I'm sitting here looking, I've spent so much time on Zoom lately. Like, I really like to look at what is going on in people's homes, like behind them. So I'm in an office right now, and you may see a drum pad and a music stand in the corner, but the most of this office is decorated with stuff celebrating the national parks, because that's another big thing I'm passionate about. But I brought that up because I'm looking in your back, like right behind your left ear. I'm seeing this, of course, I'm trying to trace it with my cursor, which is not helpful for anyone, but there's no career arc for me. Like, I think career and I think lives look like the pattern on that back wall. Like, it's these peaks and valleys and up and down. And what I really love about it is just when you get to the far end of it, it goes underneath and then goes up and down again. And then sometimes you wind up right back where you started. And that's kind of what I feel like my life and my career has been. It's not just a straight line. It's not an arc. It's jagged. It's rough. And sometimes there's peaks and valleys, so.
I like the analogy. And since we've already kind of dipped into the top of your resume, which I have printed out here next to me, for anybody listening who may not be familiar with Mr. Scott, I'm gonna read off some of the resume, not the whole thing. But performance-wise, you mentioned Buffalo. We've got the U.S. Air Force Concert Band, Atlanta Symphony, Atlanta Ballet, Atlanta Opera that I mentioned at the beginning, North Carolina Symphony, North Carolina Opera, North Carolina Ballet, Atlanta Symphony, or excuse me, I said the Alabama Symphony, Charleston Symphony, Virginia, Key West, Charlotte, Grand Teton Festival Orchestra. There's a whole list here. So can you talk a little bit about either the process of auditioning for all those groups? Are there bridges that get you from one to the next? How do you balance going through different groups and making those transitions?
Well, that's a very good question, actually. I have to think of a good answer for it now. So I actually, one of the reasons, again, I kind of mentioned that up and down, that career is really peaks and valleys, is that a lot of people would consider winning an orchestra job to be a peak. And I kind of had an unusual career path in that I was lucky at a very young age to win a job. And it is challenging to do that. I mean, the competition is very, very high at a national level at almost any orchestra job. I mean, you get people from all over the country, even something local that you might think, great, I'm local, I'm good, I have a really good shot at this. I just need to be the best person in this region. And that's not always true, certainly. So I did the job in Buffalo for 3 years. I did get tenure, so I was pretty well set as long as I wanted to stay there. I got tenure after a year. But one of my other passions in percussion is percussion ensemble. And I had met two very close friends and colleagues at Rice. We had formed a percussion trio called the Ataka Percussion Group. And we all sort of went our separate ways after Rice. But after a couple of years in Buffalo, I actually got a little, I don't want to say bored is the wrong word, but I was missing percussion ensemble. I was missing playing at that intimate level. And so I actually got honestly a little bit jaded about the career, and actually even looked into going to law school for a year. Buffalo is a long way from where I grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina. I missed my family. I missed, I had a dog. I missed being able to travel places and see people that I loved. So I was looking for an opportunity to get back a little closer to home and to also reconnect with my peers from college. So my buddy Mark Dennett had already finished his second or third year in the Air Force Band in DC, the Air Force Concert Band, and 2 vacancies came up for that position. And so I'm like, you know what? Wouldn't that be an interesting thing? So I actually took an audition for the Air Force Concert Band. My buddy Adam, who was the third member of our trio, took the same exact audition, and both of us won, which the odds of that are astronomical. I mean, we were pretty good. We prepared, like we tried to leave it as little up to chance as possible, but we both got the job and we're like, you know what? Let's do this. Let's make this happen. So we all three lived in DC, had the same schedule, and then we're able to sort of launch our career in percussion ensemble as well. It was on the side because when you're in a government position like that, you don't have a whole lot of, how do I say this? You don't have a lot of say over your schedule. If they say 4 a.m, you got to be here and do this, you got to be there and do that. There's no union to say, no, you're not allowed to rehearse before 4 a.m. And there were times we were playing for the president or doing an event at the White House or something like that, where you'd literally, it'd be a 12 to 16 hour commitment from whatever time they said. So anyway, that was a jump from there. And then after 4 years of doing that, again, it wasn't so much being bored. It was just, I'm sort of a free spirit, I think, musically. If I'm not doing something, I miss doing it. And so I missed the opportunity to play in an orchestra. I missed playing in ballet. I missed playing in pits for Broadway shows. So I made a calculated choice after those two full-time jobs with the salary and the benefits and all that stuff, calculated risk to take a jump and move back where I grew up to Raleigh and became a full-time freelancer, which is one of the reasons why the resume is full of such a variety of ensembles, because I made the choice to be a freelancer. And that's what I've been doing ever since. That would have been, 7 or 8 years into my career. And to tell you the truth, I don't regret that at all. It can be a little questionable sometimes in terms of knowing where the next paycheck is coming from. But the variety and the diversity of what I get to do, I think completely makes up for that.
Very cool, which I'll go and throw out now. We do have some really awesome educational material that we're going to be sharing in a little while from him about. There's a great PDF that you've sent us. You've got some other videos of you talking about this. So again, if for any of our younger listeners, this is key stuff, which I went to music school, and of course a big part of music school is you're studying the instrument and you're studying excerpts and you're studying history and theory. And sometimes we get to graduation day and we forget to think about, how do I put this into play? How do I actually get work? So this is an invaluable resource. I'm excited for us to share it for people to get this and see it and everything. Which, while we're plugging you, I want to go ahead and give you the opportunity, since you're wearing your Emory hat today, to talk a little bit about your current not so freelance gig, your teaching spot at Emory.
Yes, it's a wonderful opportunity. I really love it. The school obviously has a national reputation academically. People have heard of it from all over the country. You have your little pockets in the country, your different schools that you might consider like Ivy League, like they might say Rice is the Ivy League of the Southwest. Sometimes you hear, that Duke is the Ivy League of the South. I think in many ways, Emory kind of falls into that category. Like academically, the credentials are unparalleled. So music there, we only take undergraduates. I think the choral conducting program and I think the organ program allows master's students. So it's definitely only undergrads that play percussion. There you can get a BA, Bachelor's of Arts degree. And I think my favorite part about it is that I think I'm a pretty well-traveled, pretty well-versed person with a lot of interests. Percussion is just one of them. You can tell, again, I'm a big baseball fan, so as long as we're done today, by the time that second game of the Dodger series starts, we're good. One of the things I love about Emory is that the students come from all over the country, really all over the world. And a lot of times I think I sort of have a pretty weird sense of humor, but I found that most of my students at Emory tend to get it. They tend to laugh at my jokes, or they've maybe just told each other that they better, or they're going to be in trouble. So the students there, most of them don't necessarily go to Emory intending to be professional musicians. I would say the majority of them don't. But I've given them the background there to be able to do that. So the study that we do, they would tell you, the students, percussion ensemble, private lessons, orchestra, it's fairly intense. I mean, I'm not cutting them some slack just because they might be double majoring in 2 other areas. They're expected to work hard and learn, and the idea is that some of them, if they have an experience like I had at Governor School, that they get the bug and they have the talent and they have the desire that they're going to be ready to do this for a career by the time they leave. And always learning, you're never ever good enough. But I'm trying to teach them the fundamentals in every area that I can. So when they're done, they can prepare and move on. And if they want to study it in graduate school, then they're going to be good enough to do that. And the reality is most of them will probably become doctors and lawyers and politicians and God knows what. But there are opportunities to continue playing after you're done. That's something you think about that's very unique to percussion. And something that I address, I think, in my clinic packet as well, is we get so used to, as percussionists, having instruments there for us. Like, it's just there, and it's a given. I don't have to buy a marimba to play marimba. I don't have to buy timpani to play timpani. And it's what I keep instilling in these students is like, what are you going to do? Like, is this just going to end? Like, I've graduated my first senior 2 years ago, and I was like, what? Okay, so now what? Like, are you done playing? Like, are you going to get a degree? Like, how is you going to continue playing? So that's one of the reasons I'm so inspired by this freelance thing, is to make sure that everyone that wants to do this at whatever level they want to do it at, they know how to make that happen. Because it's kind of a daunting thing, even if you're planning on doing it full time. It's a daunting thing to get started. So I would say the freelance idea comes up a lot at Emory. And of course, the percussion ensemble thing I'm very passionate about. I know we're going to talk about that probably a little bit towards the end. But I'd say overall there, the students get a great education. They're usually pretty bright kids who are motivated, which helps me a lot. And any of them that are watching this, don't just pretend I didn't say that, because I don't want them to get a chip on their shoulders. So anyway, the school's great. The performing ensembles and the faculty are truly world-class. Check out their website, any young students. Percussion-wise, we have myself and Mark Jancic, principal attending of the Atlanta Symphony, our teachers there. He's been teaching there 35 years, I think. And I'm not even sure. I think this is my 6th year now teaching there. So I love it. I wouldn't trade it for the world. I really wouldn't.
Very cool. And we'll be including links to anything from any of your personal sites or anything like that to the Emory page, so people can check out the program. Again, if any of our younger viewers are watching right now, it's harder to go tour colleges right now, which is going to be one of our topics in just a bit, with everybody still kind of being on sort of the edge of quarantine. We can't go tour colleges the way we used to. So it's nice to be able to either hear you talk about the program here, then visit the website and kind of look and see, all right, what have they done? What have they played? All that kind of good stuff.
Andrew, if I can interrupt a sec, something I should definitely point out in case I forget to do this is the one thing that I was able to do when I first started there was to start the Emory Percussion Symposium, which is an annual event. It doesn't look very strong that we're going to be able to have one this year, and that's true for obviously a lot of people. And one thing I've done to help build the knowledge of the program, the percussion department in particular, is the symposium, of course, and we have had some really, really wonderful guests, some wonderful performances, some wonderful clinics there the last 4 years that I've done it. And we have a YouTube page for that, so maybe I can share some links for that. The Percussion Ensemble and the Youth Orchestra now has a percussion ensemble. They both have YouTube pages as well. So I am such a tech idiot. I mean, I'm like so low key, basically, typically, but I have learned that I have to try to play this game a little bit with the social media and YouTube and trying to get on board with the video. And the Zoom stuff in the last 6 months has really kind of pushed the envelope for me in a good way. So knowing that those resources are out there. So anyone listening, please do check out some of our videos. I think we're going to hopefully share a few towards the end of this. But the symposium in particular has been a really nice thing, and we do hope to get that back up and running once things are safe again. Last thing to point out, you mentioned touring campuses, how difficult that is right now. It's just so odd to think I have about half of my students have not opted out of participating this semester, but they've opted out of being at Emory in person. They gave all freshmen had the option to show up in person. Upperclassmen were given just a few instruments were allowed. I think people that played organ were allowed to attend if they were sophomore through senior. And then I think the only other instrument was percussion. So basically the musicians in person at Emory right now are freshmen, some organ players, and then percussionists at whatever level. So having said that, we still had some students opt out for safety reasons. And so I have a student from Northern California, just outside of San Francisco, who is a freshman, who I've been teaching Zoom lessons to every week. And she's a lovely, wonderful player, but she has never been to Atlanta. She has never set foot on Emory's campus. And last time we did a lesson, she was wearing her Emory sweatshirt. I'm like, well, where did you get that? She's obviously, Google, not too difficult. But just so strange to think about that,
Absolutely. That actually ties well into, I'll go ahead and ask, since you've mentioned some good things that you've done during some of the quarantine stuff, what do you think would be the biggest positive you found from the way things are right now?
I found, it's so easy to talk about the negatives of this, and I'm sure, again, like the peaks and valleys thing keeps coming back. We've probably all had our ups and downs with testing things out and frustrations and good experiences. I think to me, probably the best thing was it forced me to kind of rethink the way I educate, what my role is as an educator. We very much tend to get into and get used to it, man. I draw a lot of sports metaphors. When I teach, because percussion is very physical, there's always a lot of sports connections that I make. Not as helpful if the students aren't very athletically inclined, but I do it anyway. Anyway, I found that I need to sort of rethink the way I teach. And physically, when you're not able to be there in person, it's obviously very challenging. Like for me, percussion, no matter what the instrument, I know what every part of my body is doing all the time, and I pay attention to it. I had pretty serious back trouble when I was younger. A lot of it actually came from drumline, like not having very good techniques and practices back then. So it's difficult to teach on a Zoom lesson this full body experience, and to be there in person and to manipulate and to say, all right, lower your feet because sometimes I can't see there, or lower your butt to make your body core more balanced because I can't see their position. So I realized at the end of last semester when the quarantine hit, I'm like, I still need to finish our lessons for the semester, but I also need to come up with a way for them to still be in touch with each other, to communicate. So I came up with the Emory Percussion Club, which is something I think we're actually going to continue doing, because I tend to focus, this was the chords metaphor I was going for before, I tend to focus a lot on X's and O's in my private lessons. And I realized, as much as I talk about it, I don't actually make the students do enough listening. So I basically created, essentially it's a book club for percussion music and orchestral music. So we would do half-an-hour lessons every week with every private student, and then we would all meet collectively for an hour at the end of the week, and they would have listening assignments that they were supposed to listen to and then answer a few questions about and get together, sort of like you would with a book club. So we had some really interesting assignments, and it was cool. Like the students, I realized, had not been exposed to the kind of music that I thought maybe they had. And so I gave them orchestral things to listen to that kind of trace the history of the genre, sort of beginning with Beethoven and actually ending, not coincidentally, with the John Adams Harmony Lyra piece. We had Rite of Spring, Mahler Symphony No. 2, some things like that, where the percussion gets gradually more involved over the last 200 years or so. Did the same thing with Percussion Ensemble. We listened to Credo and Us by John Cage. They only had 3 percussion ensemble pieces. They're pretty extensive works, though. Drumming by Steve Reich, and Water by Alejandro Viñao. And all of them, again, sort of trace a fairly complex history to the way the genres have evolved. And I just found that was really a wonderful positive. The students were engaged. They perked up. They enjoyed the listening. And if they didn't, they were allowed to say so, and they were allowed to give their opinions and share. And it's something that once we're back in person, I'm going to continue doing that. To me, that just finding a creative way around not being able to be there in person, I think was, to me, the best part of the quarantine so far.
Very cool. And as with everything so far in this conversation, I think that kind of leads well. We had one big topic we were going to talk about today, because when I asked you about doing an educational segment, at least 2 things that you were really passionate about: the freelancing stuff, which we're going to be sharing separately, and it's something I'm excited to talk about because we have similar views on this, but conducting a percussion ensemble, and maybe whether you should or shouldn't, and how that goes, which I'm sure right now none of us are conducting any ensembles, but talk to me about conducting percussion ensemble.
So actually, one thing I am very fortunate, it took about 6 weeks into school to make this happen, but the Emory Percussion Ensemble actually is playing in person.
Very nice.
You're one of the few that I know that are doing that. We have rule after rule after rule after rule set up to make sure that it's safe. We are playing 12 feet apart, which if you've done percussion ensemble already, you can realize there's some inherent problems and challenges there. Everyone's wearing masks. We have regulations about how much time in a space you can spend before you have to leave and then let the air circulate and then come back. So it's an interesting challenge. We are about to have our 3rd rehearsal this evening, actually. Probably around 6:30 this evening, I'll do my drive to Atlanta. By the way, the number one best thing about quarantine was not having to drive and sit in traffic to and from Atlanta. And tonight I get to do it after rush hour. No morning rush hour, no evening rush hour. It's glorious. But I am missing about half of my normal cadre of students. So, and many of them are young, many of them are freshmen. So, it's an interesting experience. Like many of them, it's their only face-to-face experience that they've had as an Emory freshman. And you can imagine what that would be like. So right now we have a quartet, and 2 of them are freshmen, and those 2 are not taking private lessons, which those all have to happen over Zoom. And for me, I'm fairly animated. Hopefully you can tell just even over Zoom. But I'm missing, like, I'm cracking jokes in person, and all I see are their eyes. I realize they can't tell if I'm smiling and making a joke. I can't tell if they're getting my sense of humor. It's an interesting experience, but very proud to say we are able to play in person, and the students have really rallied so far. So that's fantastic. Okay, so we said the word conducting a percussion ensemble. I actually don't believe that there should ever be a conductor for a percussion ensemble. I believe that there should be directors, and that can mean a variety of different things. But to me, I think at a certain point, like when you're starting with a percussion ensemble, it doesn't really matter the age group. They are usually more capable of doing things than most conductors or directors give them credit for. You just kind of have to tear off the Band-Aid a little bit and see what happens. So I actually kind of have a list of reasons why I believe this. And it's not to say that you shouldn't ever conduct, because anytime I run a percussion group, I almost always conduct, literally like physically conduct the first few rehearsals. You're just getting everybody on the same page. You're getting them to open up, listen to their parts. I'm sure you know, as someone that's done this before, students tend to think maybe 1 week at a time, sometimes just 1 or 2 days in advance. So they think, okay, let me just prepare just enough to get through this week, and then I'll prepare just enough to get through the next week. So a lot of times your first couple of rehearsals are very frustrating, and there's a lot of, why didn't you learn your part? Why don't you know this? No, that X means that, and that bass drum means a bass drum, not a snare drum. You know, simple, like stuff that makes you want to pull your hair out, kind of agony, right? And making them accountable from the very first rehearsal, I think, is a very challenging thing. But knowing that they are not going to have me there to hold their hand through the last few rehearsals and the performance really makes a very big difference. So if you don't mind, Andrew, I'm actually just kind of run through some of my little spiels here. I made sure I wrote them down because I think these are important points. And seriously, feel free, if you have thoughts or opinions about this, share them at any time, because I'm bouncing these off you as much as anyone else that's listening. So I think the number one reason not to use a conductor, even for the youngest group and the most challenging piece, is that it gives all members a real sense of ownership of the piece. They have to be accountable to each other, to everyone else in the ensemble. And I think when you see live performances, having the conductor there visually, honestly, it just kind of gets in the way. Like it sort of bothered me. Basically, it makes me think, could these students do this without that person up there waving their hands, right? And it's not that the conductor doesn't have value, but I'd like to see sort of like, basically, to me, the best percussion ensembles remind me a lot of really good jazz bands or really good drum lines. Like, you know that they know how to groove, you know they know how to communicate. And in many ways, I'm trying to think, probably one of my favorite groups that I've ever heard live. Are you a bluegrass fan at all, Andrew?
A little bit. Depends on the day.
So I never was. I really was introduced to the genre by a group called Nickel Creek. Yeah. It's a really, really fabulous mandolin player. It's not ukulele, it's mandolin. That's right. And I saw them perform live in Washington, D.C. This is 15, 20 years ago now. And it was by the end of the entire first set before I realized, my God, they don't have a drummer. Like, it had never occurred to me, because their rhythm was so immaculate. Their sense of ensemble was so glorious that I didn't even notice that there wasn't a drummer. I mean, they had a guy playing upright bass who was basically their drummer. It was one of the most glorious things rhythmically that I've ever seen. And I realized, good percussion ensemble is about that level of communication. Not communicating with the conductor, but communicating with each other. So, all right, I'm going to bring up a couple more points, then I'm going to actually play a couple of excerpts from the Emory Percussion Ensemble that hopefully will articulate some of these points. So my second point, actually just brought up the drumline thing. The third is that most percussion ensemble pieces, especially if they're written for larger ensembles, maybe like 8 or more players, there's almost always a metronome somewhere to be found in the part, right? Now, it's your job as the director to find where that is, and then sort of assign someone at various different moments. Who's in charge of keeping tempo? Who do we listen to here if things get a little wonky? Because they do get wonky, right? You sacrifice a little bit, potentially some rhythmic integrity when you pull that Band-Aid off and make them do it themselves. But to me, it's worth it knowing that they're using their ears as much as their hands to make music. So, all right, so I think if you don't mind, I'm going to share screen and play an excerpt from the Percussion Ensemble. This is from Steve Riley's I Irascible, and I have about 2 or 3, 1.5 or so minute excerpts that we'll share. So let me see if this works, Andrew. So anyway, if you were able to listen to that last excerpt, hopefully you've seen some of those points I brought up illustrated so far. And it's not a perfect performance. Like, there are flaws. There are little moments that aren't as tight as others. But what makes me so proud of them as a director is that I wasn't up there to guide them through it. Like, they had to find the metronome in that case. They had to find who to look to make sure that things locked. Okay. So a few more points about this. I think, may have mentioned this already, I think just visually not having a conductor there is so much more stimulating. Like, just watching the motion and the activity of the ensemble without literally someone's hands, that's sort of the focal point in the way. You think about watching an orchestra, one of the things I love about orchestra as opposed to in some ways wind ensemble is that there's a lot more motion involved. It's not just like in a wind ensemble, where's the motion? Like in terms of the instruments themselves. You have the trombone slides moving back and forth, a little bit some finger activity, but the majority of the motion that happens in a wind ensemble is in the percussion section. So there's always a lot to latch onto there. In orchestra, you have the strings moving, you have the percussion moving, there's a lot of stuff going on. So in that case, it's funny to me, I go see a professional orchestra and I almost never pay attention to the conductor. I kind of just want them to get out of the way. And that's one of the reasons I love chamber music so much, is that it's sort of up to the players to be their own conductors. So another point to bring up is I really think as long as you are able to make them do it, I think students having cues written into their parts, knowing other people's parts as well as their own, is essential. And one thing that it really, really helps to do is it gets people's eyes and heads up out of the music stand. Because when there's a conductor, you know that fail-safe is up there and you can only look up when it's necessary. You can get away with it. And to me, that's such a bummer, because you'll have half the ensemble looking up and playing, half the ensemble staring at their part, and their stands and the music become a part of the experience. And I don't want that to be part of the experience. I want it to be something that I don't notice at all. So we're going to play this next excerpt here, which is again also from Steve Riley's Irascible. It's a much slower, more amorphous section, and you can really see the students listening to each other and using their heads to communicate. There's actually some vocal parts in there that they have to sync up. And at all points, if you really look closely, you'll see how they interact with each other, hopefully in a very effective way. So I think you'll enjoy that as well. Okay, and the last few points to bring up leading into our last excerpt is that I really believe in communicating not just through cues and through knowledge of each other's parts, but also through movement. I think I like drawing these parallels, of course, like I mentioned, to jazz band and drumline. Those are very physical, almost dance-like experiences when they're done well. And I think that's never more true than with percussion ensemble. Imagine if you went to the ballet and the conductor wasn't in the pit, but standing on stage conducting. And that to me is what it sort of feels like when I see someone conduct percussion ensemble. Like, you're in the way, man, get out of the way. You know, I want to see this dance-like quality take effect. And so the next excerpt is actually from a much slower chorale type marimba arrangement that I did of Morton Lauridsen's O Magnum Mysterium. Really, really beautiful piece. And it's for two five-octave marimbas that are, in this case, I have them arranged so that they're facing each other. One of the things that I did for years and years and years with my percussion trio was, it sort of became a niche for us. We would take various pieces and arrange them or have composed for us for 3 players on one 5-octave instrument. And again, to kind of bring up that dance-like quality, you get in each other's way. Like, there's kind of no way around it. And you can kind of find different creative ways to get to the instrument, to kind of move your elbows, to use different parts of the bar. And you wind up finding there's almost no way to play that kind of music unless you memorize your music. Because if you're staring at a stand, you can't do the choreography that's necessary to kind of make that thing happen. So one brief concession, I did try to arrange this particular piece for one 5-octave marimba, and I was just, some of the voicings were a little too close together. It actually just wasn't going to work. So my concession was, let's have 2 marimbas facing each other. So they're not quite as in each other's way as you might sometimes see. But one thing you will notice from this clip is that they do communicate, and there's no, like, it's a very there is a time to it, but it's a chorale. So it speeds up, it slows down. And you'll notice at all times they're aware of how each other are moving and how they're beginning and ending their roles, and their start and stop points are synced by repetition. Of course, they've done it a lot, but also in that moment, you know, when nerves are shaking and they're playing for an audience, like, they can rely on each other to help each other through if something doesn't go quite right. So. Okay, last thing to point out about this issue is, as a director, again, not conductor, as a director, your rehearsals are going to change. They're going to be intense. You are trying to you're trying to turn yourself as a director, each student of the ensemble, into a conductor themselves in terms of their awareness of all the other parts. It's not easy, it's intense. Like, you have to spend time not just playing, but talking about cues and making sure people take their pencil and write in as much as they can into their spaces and into their rests, so that when things go wrong, because they do, right? In live performance, man, it doesn't matter the level of player. if I do a recital, one of the things that I do now is play in a duo with my wife, a bassoon player. It's a percussion bassoon duo. Like, what a strange thing. Whoever would think that would be a thing. If we play an hour, 15-minute recital, some things are going to go wrong, and it happens all the time. We have had to start and stop again before. It does happen. And we're pretty accomplished, pretty professional players who have been doing this for a long time. So my point is, things go wrong. Knowing that that happens at even the highest level, why not let your students who may only be doing this for 5 to 8 years of their lives, like, give them that opportunity to be in charge and take that ownership. But it does make rehearsals intense, and it's not just about, here's the beat, follow my beat. If you get lost, be ready to go there. So last thing to bring up with this is that the way you set up your ensemble is really, really important. Communication is key. Visual awareness and oral awareness are so important in this situation that I tend to see a lot of ensembles that are conducted tend to have a very sort of thin arch to them, right? Where hopefully everybody's at least pointed towards a conductor, but you can get away with a pretty wide arch. And to me, when you take away the conductor, things have to get condensed. The setup is really crucial. Like, if you have sort of leaders in the group, they have to be visible to everyone. Ideally, everyone can see everyone else. If you're talking about 4 players, that's easy to do. If you're talking about 13 to 16, that gets more complicated. Stage setups aren't always conducive to that. So we've had to get creative at Emory because the stage where we perform, there are risers, and there's actually only a fairly small area that's flat. And then there's some sort of percussion-specific area up top, which works great in orchestra. But for percussion ensemble, you have one person way over here and another person 60 feet on the other side, and the angle is not sharp enough that they can see each other. So we try to really make a point of paying real close attention to how things set up, and that really winds up being on you, the director, to experiment and take some time. So that's what I mean about intense rehearsals. Like, there's going to be a lot of time that isn't just playing and conducting. There's going to be a lot of other stuff that winds up taking precedence once the Band-Aid is peeled off and they're on stage, the lights come on, they're all entirely on their own. So anyway, you can probably tell I'm pretty passionate about this. But it's not to say that you're giving people a bad experience when you conduct, but I think you're giving them only about half the experience that they should get. So that's how I feel about that.
Excellent. Now, I know we're going to have to wrap this up probably in the next minute or two. I do hope that we'll have you out some other time to talk some more about this, or just other segments in the future, so we can pick your brain a little more.
Please.
If you want to have this, if there's anything else you want to say, this is your time to any last words, and then I'll wrap us up.
Well, young players, old players, whoever's watching this, any friends and colleagues who are laughing at me right now, I hope I'll get to watch your interviews too and laugh at you. But I would say, especially for the students, I think education is my biggest passion. I love working with students, and I say this in any of the different varieties of clinics that I've done around the country over the years. Like, I always have my email and Facebook address listed on there. I believe if you share the clinic packet, that should be in there. I'm passionate about this. You don't have to be a private student of mine to send me an email and say, hey, Mr. Pollard, I saw this and was interested. Can you help me? What do you suggest I do? And the beauty about the percussion world is that most of the time, if the person you're asking isn't an expert in that area, it will not take more than a quick email to refer them to someone who is an expert in that area, because it's such a tight-knit community. And again, like I said, not entirely, but primarily, my career now is mostly based on playing in large ensembles, my performing career. But I still have a passion for drumline. I still have a passion for jazz band. I still have a passion for all these other areas of percussion. And I will say one thing about the symposium, that in 4 years, we've managed to basically, the goal was to try to create over 4 years what you might experience if you were able to attend the PAS convention for 4 straight days. Every hour, something different and unique going on. And you wind up covering almost every genre. If you choose to and you're interested, you can check out a drum set player. So we've had a drum set artist, we've had a marching band artist, we've had marimba soloists, we've had college professors, we've had high school teachers, we've had a variety, we've had percussion ensembles. And so the idea, and I will say the only thing I don't have yet, I think, to check off is an ethnic percussion expert. And so pay attention in the next couple of years. There's going to be someone come in who is like a crazy, wicked maraca soloist or something like that, just to make you look at an instrument in a very different way. That to me was always my favorite thing about the PASIC convention, the international, the PASIC, is that you could watch someone play an instrument that you probably took for granted, and watch someone in the hands of an expert totally reinvent in your mind what's possible in that instrument. And that's what inspires me. That's what makes me want to practice. And I hope that the students watching this in particular will take advantage of that. Because you guys, by the way, doing a great job. Georgia PAS didn't, in my opinion, have that much going on until the last few years. So you, Nate Lee, you guys are doing a great job of like reaching out, making things happen again. Hopefully there'll be a regular day of percussion again for Georgia very soon. I think that's in the works. So this is awesome. I really appreciate you guys doing this.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk with us, share a little bit. Again, I think maybe we'll try to pick your brain in the future, and we are going to be sharing the educational content from him very soon. Really, really, really cool stuff. So once again, for any of our viewers, consider signing up for PAS if you're not active right now. We do have, as we're recording this, PASIC 2020 is coming up. If you're seeing this before November, go ahead and register for that. Even though it's virtual, there's a lot of cool stuff on there. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next interview.